We live in a world that talks about joy constantly, but experiences it rarely. Scroll your feed and you'll see it everywhere. Researchers are studying joy. Social media is selling joy as a lifestyle brand. There's even a massive citizen science experiment called Big Joy Project, where almost 18,000 people have tried 7 days of micro-joy to see if it helps them feel better. And their results are beautiful. People who do simple practices like savor beauty, express gratitude, or small acts of kindness felt a 20% boost in emotional well-being in just 1 week. So joy is a big topic. And yet, underneath all that, something else is going on. Public health leaders are talking about an epidemic of loneliness. The U.S. Surgeon General reports about half of adults are experiencing significant loneliness, with real impacts on depression, anxiety, heart health, even mortality. Youth mental health is being called the defining public health issue of our time, with a decade-long rise in anxiety and despair. Global happiness data shows that while some countries remain relatively high in life satisfaction, large parts of the world are seeing more stress, worry, and anger year over year. At the same time, psychologists are noticing something strange. When people chase happiness as a goal, they often end up feeling worse. Several studies have found that the more people value being happy and monitor their happiness levels, the more likely they are to feel disappointed, less satisfied, and more depressed. Happiness turns into a moving target that they can never quite reach. So we have this paradox. We have more language for joy than ever. We have more tools and hacks and joy challenges than ever. We have more information about mental health and well-being than any previous generation. And yet, many people describe their actual inner experience as flat, numb, overwhelmed, or quietly empty. Not always in an acute crisis, just not really tasting joy. So we're in a joy crisis. Not that joy has disappeared, but that our capacity to feel it, to trust it, to live from it has been thinned out by loneliness, by overwork, information overload, and a kind of pressure to be happy that backfires. If this resonates with you at all, you're not alone. You're living in a culture that is incredibly confused about what joy actually is. Keeping all this in mind, welcome to the third week of Advent, Gaudete Sunday. Gaudete means rejoice. It seems ironic that the tradition places a call to joy right in the middle of a season that's about waiting, longing, and not there-ness. It doesn't say, rejoice once everything is resolved. It says, rejoice now, inside the unresolved. And that is a very different invitation than optimize your mood to feel joy. In this very full and juicy episode, we're going to pull joy down out of the clouds and look at it from a few angles, including how Franciscan spirituality understands joy, why joy is not the same thing as happiness, what neuroscience is discovering about joy in the body, what blocks joy in everyday life, and how someone like Francis of Assisi could be called a mystic of joy while living a life that on paper, looks incredibly hard. Because if there really is a joy crisis in our world, Advent is not asking you to fix it by pretending that you feel something you don't feel. Advent is inviting you to discover a different kind of joy. A joy that can live inside uncertainty. A joy that grows out of hope and peace. A joy that doesn't depend on everything finally being okay. You're listening to the Holy Rebels podcast, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Mystics. I'm Nina Hirlaender, Franciscan sister, spiritual director, and founder of Dancing Spirit Tours. If you're a spiritual seeker or a mystic in the making, you're in the right place. Let's get started. The word Advent comes from the Latin, adventus, which means arrival. Now, of course, on a religious level, Advent is about the arrival of Jesus. But on a spiritual level, Advent is also about the arrival of God in you now. So ask yourself, what is God trying to birth in my life right now? You can think of Advent as a spiritual new year because you're invited to begin again at a deeper level. A new year in the spiritual life doesn't start with, how can I do more? It starts with, what needs to be released so that something truer can arrive? This attitude of rest and renewal becomes apparent in nature. If you're in the northern hemisphere right now, the leaves are dropping and nature is going into hibernation. The Christian tradition has a word for this pattern of renewal and releasing. The word is gnosis, which means self-emptying. It comes from the hymn in Philippians where Christ empties himself and takes on human form. In the story of Jesus, God pours itself out in love by becoming a small, vulnerable baby. Father Richard Rohr puts it this way: self-emptying is not just something God does once. It is the pattern of reality itself. A continual pouring out that makes room for new life. So if Advent is the spiritual new year, it doesn't begin with ambition. It begins with making space. Letting go of whatever is crowding your heart. Releasing stories that no longer tell the truth. Setting down expectations you no longer carry. Clearing room in your inner life so that something of God can awaken within you. And this is exactly what we've begun to do in the last 2 episodes. In week 1 of this Advent series, we talked about hope. Hope as radical trust, especially when you can't see a way forward. That was already a kind of emptying, a loosening your grip on outcomes so that God can move in you. In week 2, that was last week, we talked about peace. Peace as returning to the still point inside you, even when the world around you feels chaotic. That's another kind of emptying. Stepping outside of the constant reactivity so that you can actually notice the holy presence that holds you. Now, in week 3, we stand at this threshold of joy. And here is the key idea I want you to carry for the rest of this episode. Advent is about arrival, But arrival always begins with making room. Joy is not something that you bolt on to an already overloaded life. Joy grows in the space that hope and peace have started to clear. Joy is what begins to rise when you have emptied just enough fear, control, and noise for God's life to be felt within you again. So as we talk about joy today, I want you to hear it in that context. You are not being asked to force a feeling. You are being invited into a new year of the soul, where something of God is arriving in you. And joy is one of the ways that you will recognize that arrival. Joy is different from happiness. Happiness is a feeling state that's tied to your circumstances and to your life satisfaction. Happiness is real and it definitely matters, but it rises and it falls depending on what's happening around you. Joy is something different. Thomas Aquinas says that joy is caused by love. He says that we rejoice when we're in the presence of what we love, or when we know that the good of the beloved endures. That is very different from, I feel good because my day is going smoothly. Joy in that sense is not just an emotion. Joy is the felt effect of relationship. It's what happens inside you when you're connected to what you love and to the one who loves you. Happiness is often about how your life is going, and joy is about who you are with and what you belong to. You can feel unhappy about your day and still have a deep current of joy that comes from knowing how much you're loved, that you're held, and that your life has meaning. Psychology and neuroscience are actually starting to confirm this difference between happiness and joy. There's now a body of research showing that when people chase happiness as a personal goal and put a lot of pressure on themselves to be happy, it often backfires. They report lower well-being. In other words, when happiness is the target, we tend to miss it. At the same time, studies around relationships, social connection, and meaning show that people who feel connected, who belong to communities, who act from their values, and who experience a sense of purpose tend to report more stable joy and better mental health over time, even when life is hard. Joy is also a body state. When your nervous system shifts into what somatic therapist Stephen Porges calls ventral vagal state, you feel grounded and connected enough to engage. Joy is the natural expression of a regulated, connected nervous system, rather than a performance of positivity. Joy shows up in the body as warmth in the chest, a softening in the muscles, and the ability to smile or laugh, express curiosity and playfulness. So, happiness is mostly emotional and circumstantial, where joy is relational, spiritual, and embodied. Happiness is, things are going my way right now. And joy is, I am connected to what matters, even when things are not going my way. Happiness is often about outcome. Joy is about alignment. Alignment with love, with truth, with God, and with your own deepest self. That difference matters because it changes how you evaluate your own spiritual life. If you secretly believe that being spiritual means feeling happy a lot, you will judge yourself every time you feel flat, anxious, tired, or sad. You might think, if I trusted God more, I wouldn't feel this way. Or, if my faith were stronger, I would be more joyful. But if joy is the fruit of love and alignment, then the question shifts. The question is no longer, how do I feel right now? The question becomes, what am I connected to right now? Am I connected to God, however I understand God? Am I connected to my own body, to my breath? Am I connected to other people in an honest way in this moment? Am I connected to what I truly value? You can be in grief and still be rooted in joy. You can be in uncertainty and still be rooted in joy. You can be in the middle of a very unglamorous season of your life and still have this quiet knowing that you are held, that you are not alone, and that love is still real here. That is joy. And this is where Francis of Assisi comes in. Because Saint Francis is often remembered as the happy saint, the one who sang to the sun and talked to the birds. But in the deeper Franciscan tradition, he is known as the mystic of joy, because Francis lived from a place of deep inner freedom, and he called that freedom perfect joy. There's a story that comes from a medieval collection called The Little Flowers of St. Francis. One commentary on it says that the dominant keynote in Francis's life was joy. Joy in God, in poverty, in the wonders of creation, in the cross of Christ. And it highlights this episode in Brother Leo and Francis's life as the clearest window into Francis's understanding of joy. Picture this. It's winter. Francis and his friend Brother Leo are walking along a cold road from Perugia to the little community of the Porziuncola. The wind is sharp. The path is muddy. They are tired and cold. As they walk, Francis calls out to Brother Leo. Brother Leo, make note. If the friars in every land gave a great example of holiness, that would not be perfect joy. They walk a bit further, and Francis calls out again. Brother Leo, if the friars healed the sick, made the lame walk, cast out demons, even raised the dead, that would not be perfect joy. They walk more, and Francis continues. Brother Leo, if the friars knew all the languages, if they mastered all the sciences, could explain all of Scripture, and knew the secrets of every heart, that would not be perfect joy either. And Francis keeps going on like this for a long time. If they converted every unbeliever, if they preached with dazzling success, if they had every spiritual gift, none of this would be perfect joy. Well, eventually, Brother Leo has had enough. He says, Francis, I'm begging you, tell me plainly, what is perfect joy if none of these things? Francis answers him. He says, Leo, imagine that after this long, cold journey, we finally reach our destination. Imagine we're soaked with rain and covered in mud, shivering with cold and exhausted with hunger. Imagine we knock on the door of our community and the porter, our good friend, doesn't recognize us. Imagine we tell him, "We're two of your brothers," but he refuses to believe us. He calls us imposters. He says we're only pretending to be friars in order to steal from the poor. Imagine then our good friend who doesn't recognize us slams the door in our faces and leaves us outside in the snow. If in that moment, Leo, we can accept such treatment patiently, without anger, without complaining, and we can keep seeing this as a chance to share in a way of Christ, then this is finally perfect joy. That's a shocking punchline, isn't it? No success, no recognition, no comfort, no justice even. And this is what Francis calls perfect joy? Let me be clear here. Francis is not glorifying abuse. No, human dignity matters. Francis is saying that the deepest kind of joy is not tied to external outcomes at all. Perfect joy, for him, is the state of being so rooted in God that even humiliation cannot uproot love from your heart. Spiritual writers close to Francis picked up on this thread. St. Bonaventure says that all creatures gave Francis joy and consolation, and that he found himself lifted to God through everything he encountered, even hardship. G.K. Chesterton describes Francis like a burning furnace of glowing gratitude and humility, that he was one of the most joyful personalities in history. The perfect joy story is a concentrated version of third week Advent spirituality. Francis is not teaching you to seek out humiliation. He's teaching you to locate your joy in the place that insults and setbacks cannot reach. To put this in psychological language, you could say that Francis moved his sense of worth off the external scoreboard. His center of joy was no longer, do people approve of me? Are my efforts successful? Is my life comfortable? Francis's center of joy had become, I belong to God. I am following the gospel as I understand it. I am free to love, no matter what happens to me. Once your joy lives in that freedom, circumstances still hurt, but they do not own you. They do not define you. Why does all of this matter? Because most of us, without meaning to, attach joy to achievement. We think, I'll find joy when I finally get through my to-do list, when my body feels better, when my relationships are smoother, when I'm well rested, when my work is recognized, when my spiritual life looks more impressive. Francis takes all those things, piles them in a list and says, beautiful as they are not where perfect joy lives. So ask yourself, can I remain rooted in love when I feel misunderstood? Can I stay grounded in love when I'm cold, tired, rejected? Can I respond with patience when my ego is stung? Now, this doesn't mean you never set boundaries or name harm. It does not mean you call abuse holy. Francis himself was fiery in defense of someone who is vulnerable. What it does mean is that at the deepest level, Your joy is not correlated to your circumstances. It flows from your freedom and ability to love. So when we talk about Franciscan joy, we're not talking about a bubbly personality. We're talking about a way of being in which you are so anchored in the love of God and so emptied of the need to cling to image and status that even in the cold and the mud, you can say, I am free to love. And that is why Francis is the mystic of joy. Let's name 5 common obstacles to joy. 5 reasons why joy can feel so far away. I am going to walk you through each of them, and as you listen, see if you can recognize yourself. The first obstacle to joy is hypervigilance, when your body is always scanning for danger. Hypervigilance is a state of constant alertness, always looking over your shoulder, always bracing for what might go wrong. It's a common feature of anxiety disorders, and it's physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausting. Hypervigilance often exists alongside emotional numbing and an inability to experience positive emotions. So if your body is wired to stay ready for threat, then joy might not feel safe. Joy asks you to soften for a moment. And hypervigilance thinks, if I relax, I will miss the next blow. This is not a moral failure. It's your nervous system doing its best to protect you. But if you're always waiting for the next disaster, you're not going to be free enough to experience joy. The second obstacle to joy is exhaustion and burnout. When you're too empty to even register joy. When you're in burnout or emotional exhaustion, you don't have much capacity to notice or absorb positive experiences. You might see something beautiful or receive a kind word, but it just slides off. There's no sponge left to soak it in. Again, this is not a sign that you lack faith or depth. It's a sign that the fire has been burning with no wood for a long time. The third obstacle to joy is scarcity mindset. When an attitude of there is never enough drowns out your delight. Scarcity mindset focuses on what you lack. It traps your mind in short-term survival mode, narrows attention, and reduces overall happiness. Scarcity tightens everything: your time, your money, your emotional bandwidth, your imagination. If the script in your head is, there is not enough, or I am not enough, this could be taken away at any moment, then joy will feel almost irresponsible. It will sound like denial, like ignoring the very real constraints you live with. So you stay vigilant, and joy stays distant. The fourth obstacle to joy is distrust. It's the idea that if I let this in, it will hurt even more when it ends. There's something that Brené Brown calls foreboding joy. In her research on vulnerability, she found that for many people, joy is actually the most terrifying emotion. The moment they feel joy, their minds rush in with the fear of loss. Is that you? If you grew up in chaos, or if joyful moments were often followed by criticism, loss, or pain, your body may have learned that joy is a trap. So you keep joy at arm's length, not because you don't want it, but because some deep part of you believes it's safer that way. The fifth obstacle to joy is emotional inhibition, when joy feels too vulnerable. Maybe you were taught that being exuberant, excited, or openly delighted was childish, embarrassing, or too much. Maybe you were praised for being the calm one, the responsible one, the one who doesn't make a scene. Joy exposes how much we care, and that can feel far more vulnerable than disappointment. So maybe you keep your emotional world on a tight leash. You don't let yourself get too low energy, but you also don't let yourself get too enthusiastic. Everything stays in a narrow band where you feel in control. If you see yourself in any of these 5 obstacles to joy, don't worry. These are not signs that you're incapable of joy. They are signs that joy has had to move through a lot of defenses to reach you. And this is where Advent becomes so revolutionary. Joy resists the story that you are only your wounds. Joy pushes back against the voice that says nothing will ever change. Joy stands up, however softly, to fear and scarcity and domination and says, you do not get to define the whole truth of this moment. When you allow yourself even a small moment of joy, you are not betraying your pain or the pain of the world. You're just refusing to let pain have the final word. I'd love to share an Advent practice with you. If you have an Advent wreath nearby, this is a beautiful time to use it. And if you don't, you can absolutely improvise with any candle that you have at home. You can do this now or bookmark it to do this ritual later. If you're unfamiliar, the Advent wreath is an old Christian practice that marks the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. Traditionally, an evergreen wreath is used, with 4 candles representing hope, peace, joy, and love. 1 candle is lit each Sunday, so that as Christmas approaches, the light quite literally grows. The 3rd candle is usually rose-colored, and it's often called the joy candle, that moment to rejoice right in the middle of waiting. Rituals like this can help signal safety to the nervous system, increase mindfulness, and create islands of calm in the middle of busy life. The simple act of lighting a candle can become a cue to slow down, to breathe more deeply, and to be present with yourself and with God. So if it's available to you, I invite you to actually do this with me. If you're at home, you might pause for a second, stand up, and go to your wreath. Or you can just imagine this ritual in your mind's eye. Light the 1st candle again, the candle of hope. The 1st week of Advent candle. Now light the 2nd candle, the candle of peace. The 2nd week of Advent candle. And now light the 3rd candle, the candle of joy, this week's Advent candle. And watch the flame for a moment. 3 small lights, in the middle of whatever your life looks like today. Let these flames stand as a quiet statement. Hope has not gone out. Peace is still possible. Joy is already here, even if you can feel it only in traces. If you don't have an Advent wreath, then one candle on your kitchen table or desk can do the same thing. What matters is the attention you bring to it. Let's review what we learned today. We named the truth that joy is not the same as happiness. That joy is relational, embodied, spiritual. We remembered that Franciscan joy dances through uncertainty, not because life is easy, but because love is deeper than circumstance. We named the obstacles that make joy hard to access: hypervigilance, exhaustion, scarcity, distrust, inhibition, trauma. And we reframed joy as something bold and resilient, a quiet act of defiance against despair, a way of saying, the darkness does not get the final word in my life. That is the heart of the third week of Advent. And next week, we move into the final movement of Advent, which is love. Love is the heartbeat under this whole season. Next week, we're going to talk about a kind of love that is not sentimental or soft. We'll talk about love that holds the whole universe together. It's one of my favorite episodes of the series, and the place where everything that we've explored so far comes together. Now, before we close, I want to personally invite you to something very special. Next summer, I'm taking a small group of pilgrims with me to Assisi, Italy, for a pilgrimage of peace. We'll walk in the footsteps of Francis and Claire. We'll visit places where the teachings come alive, and I'll be your guide as a Franciscan sister, taking you in the stories, into the landscapes, the chapels, and the quiet corners of Assisi that shaped an entire spiritual tradition. If your heart feels stirred by this episode, if something in you is longing for rest and renewal, for grounding, for joy that feels real and tangible, then this pilgrimage might be exactly what your soul is trying to move you toward. You can learn more at dancingspirittours.com. Take a look, let yourself imagine. May joy surprise you this week. Not the loud, performative joy, but the deep, quiet, steady joy that rises from the center of who you are. I'll see you next week for Advent's final candle of love. Until then, trust the mystic within you.